Welcome to another edition of the Building Your Career podcast. Today I'm joined by James Mickleborough of Jensen and also Veridi as well. Someone who I know has got an interest in sustainability and someone that I know from an event that he hosted a couple of weeks back at the office, which was all about women in engineering. So, James, just wanted to start off. Could you just introduce yourself, introduce who you are, and then we'll get going on how you got into kind of environment and sustainability.
Yeah, thanks, Dom. Yeah, great to be on the podcast. So I'm James Mickleborough. I'm one of the co-founders of Jensen Design, which is a structural engineering consultancy with a big focus on the environment. I'm also co-founder of a company called Veridi that is looking at building technical solutions to accelerate decarbonisation in the built environment. So I have a big passion for environmental impact generally, sustainability, and how we can use our platform to tackle climate change in any which way we can.
Yeah, and I think going back some when I kind of first started studying architecture and going to uni, which was a good 20 years or so ago now. But the sustainability agenda seemed to be a little bit of a background thing, a little bit of just slap some solar panels on and some underfloor ground source heat pumps, and then that was it really. So I know things have changed massively since then, but where did their passion start for you, and what's your kind of history in terms of being involved in sustainability?
Yeah, it's really true. It's a really good point as well. I think for me, I've always had a really big passion for the environment. It's the outside space is something I've always loved and always had a sort of kind of inner need or desire to protect and look after. But I do, like personally speaking, did have a bit of a light bulb moment. I mean, a lot of peers now laugh at me when I say this because it wasn't actually that long ago. But for some people, they've been sort of ringing this bell for 20, 30 years. But I think it was one of the sort of large, big climate change reports that came out about 3 or 4 years ago, and it really talked about where we were heading in terms of the damage to the planet, what climate change is already doing, and where we're going to end up, even if we try. And it was genuinely terrifying. I think I had a serious bit of climate change anxiety, and it just overnight just looked at my family in the face and thought, this is going to be their world, and it'll be their future generations' world, and we are the generation that need to kind of stop and start doing something about it, change the way we do things, really think about big systems change, and really start trying to put in place the things now that hopefully in time will genuinely start solving it. So it was one of those kind of light bulb moments for me, that really started changing the way I do things and think about things, and where to focus our priorities.
And what about the link with kind of engineering as well when it comes to climate or looking at construction projects? Because I know, on a event that was at last week, I know the construction industry is responsible for a lot of CO2 emissions, and I know a lot of it is down to the demolition of buildings and the life cycle of buildings as well. So I suppose for you, where did the kind of the link come from when it came to engineering and sustainability?
Well, I think it's really going back to sort of your early point about how sustainability and environmental impact has changed over the last sort of 20, 25 years. And it has become something that everyone does need to think about it. But I think the awareness of every single role in the industry to have an impact has really changed. And I think, it was easy a few years ago, sort of 5, 10 years ago, to think, oh, how much impact could we have as structural engineers? Whereas now I don't think, I think it's probably one of the first things you put on the list of the roles of a structural engineer is being able to have an impact with the materials that we choose, the structures we design on the environment. And so I think the more we get confident about understanding what's going on, and therefore what we can do and what impact we can have with that, the more we can we look at our role and how we specify materials, how we design buildings, how we as structural engineers can have an impact on that. And it's a lot more. It's a lot more than I thought, and it's a lot more than I think. I think it's much more recognised now that structural engineers have a huge impact and have a huge role to play. And from a materialities perspective, but also how those materials interact with the rest of the building and the sort of architectural and other elements in it. So it's not no, it's not like I don't. It's no, whereas sort of those defined roles, I think now, structural engineers do this, architects do this, M&E engineers do this, or whatever. Those roles are much more blurred now, I think, and I think it's more about how can we have as much impact as possible, and that more that we, that, if that means being more architectural or thinking more about the services as well as the structure, then I think that's kind of all to play for. Whereas previously, I don't think it has been quite so much. So it's exciting, but I think as structural engineers, we still need to remember what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve, and not make claims that we can't substantiate, and really try and be brave and confident with having as much impact as we possibly can.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. And I think it's the whole kind of communication piece between all the different disciplines involved in a construction project as well. So yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I suppose, is there any projects or any examples you can give at Jensen Hunt of projects that you think were, where there was a good level of communication, or everyone's kind of seemed to be on board, or the clients were on board to be able to achieve as sustainable as possible?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few now. I mean, we sort of the last year we sort of totally kind of evaluated our whole process internally and how we approach projects, and the sort of process that we go through when we design our structures, and we put environment first. So there's a process we follow now on all our projects, but there are some specific ones where they're very environmentally focused. One in particular where we've sort of gone much further than just the role of structural engineer in designing a building without any. I mean, the aim at the beginning was to design a building without any concrete, any steel, any cement, even in the foundations anywhere, and just use natural materials, so it's fully breathable. And we did it. We've done it. Like, the project's now nearly finished, and and basically we turned the sort of traditional process on its head. So, and this is kind of the way we sort of talk about it and message it, is that we started with the environmental criteria. We didn't start with the design. We started with what we wanted to achieve at the end, and then we designed the building from there. So we went and we just flipped it around, and it's been a really amazing process, because we've innovated, but we've learned loads. We've looked at how the structure needs to work with the rest of the building. We've looked at every single element, every single material that's gone into that building. We've chosen something that, it meets that really strict environmental criteria at the beginning. And, we've used no concrete in the ground. There's no steel in the building. There's everything in that building could be taken out and reused, or turned into, other building materials really, really easily. It's been an incredible process, and we've learned not just how to design and build with those types of materials, and really minimize the environmental impact, but also the process. We've taken a traditional process and turned it around. So, like, we started with the contractors were involved right from the beginning. So the first people that were appointed were the contractors. So rather than designing a building, getting to stage 4 or whatever, getting it tendered, then getting the contractors start looking at it, we turned it round and got the contractors involved from the beginning, even to help with specifying the materials, what we should use, where to get it from, is it ready available, how much does it cost, all that kind of stuff, and design the building from there. So that's been in a really amazing process before. Sorry, the lights here have just gone off. I may need to. There we go. It's got a bit. That's been a really incredible. That was my light bulb moment. But it's that's just been incredible, and we've learned so much from that. And what we really want to do now off the back of that is look at how we can spread that knowledge within the industry, but also how we can start looking at they using these kind of materials at scale, so that for larger projects or projects with multiple units, we can start using these kind of materials and these approaches for that.
That's brilliant, because for anyone listening to this who's thinking, is it possible? That sets a precedent. You know, these things can be done where main contractor is involved from the beginning. You have sustainability first and then design out from there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's awesome work. And I think I was quite keen to just go over Veridi path. And I suppose the first question is where did the idea come from for that side of things? And then secondly, you know, what is it that you're trying to achieve with
Yeah, so to give a bit of background, Veridi Path is a new company that we've set up looking specifically at decarbonisation. And the kind of idea for it really came from wanting to have some impact. So wanting to try and do as much as we can with our existing platform, and to have more of an impact. What we really the idea first came from, you know, how can we help the industry understand how to put a building together with as little carbon in it as possible, you know, and how do we know what that is? How do we know actually how to do that? And create sort of green pathways for that, which is where the name comes from. And that's where the idea came from. And I spent a good sort of, I mean, there's loads of any kind of startup thing, magazine or book you read always has these sort of images of the fuzzy head thing, and then a slightly less fuzzy head thing, and a slightly less, and then all of a sudden there's this kind of clarity you get to at the end. I'm not sure if anyone ever gets the clarity bit, but I spent a long time in the fuzzy head bit thinking, well, what do I really mean? What does that really mean?
yeah.
And then what I'm very fortunate to have a really good friend that who is now my business partner with Veridi Path, who's a software designer and has created software solutions for loads of different products. But you know, I was talking to him about it, and he said, "Well, you know, we can create a software solution for that." And so we started looking at how we would do that, and that's where the sort of the idea for Veridi Path came from, and that's where we started looking at where we really need to solve a problem specifically is how we use this data, you know, from the point of view of dealing with carbon emission data in the built environment. You know, once we've calculated it, how do we use it, and how do we use it to make decarbonisation happen? And how, you know, getting away from this sort of kind of backslapping moment of, yeah, I've measured it. Well, great. What do we do now? You know, yeah, we know what the carbon emissions of this building are. Great, but what do we do next? How do we get it down? How much can we get it down by? How can we control it? What happens if it's going up? This kind of idea of like, buildings are dynamic and they move and they change all the time, and nothing is ever static, and nor are the measurements and the carbon emissions for that building. So the more we understand that, and the more we can visualize it, the better, the more chance we've got to reduce it. So that's where that's the sort of the kind of origin story for it, and we've been building the software platform now for about a year. We're at kind of the minimum viable product stage, and starting to run some trials with data sets and looking at the output now with some sustainability consultants, which is great. So it's, you know, for us and for me specifically, it's about trying to have as much impact as possible and look at, and it's a bit of fun, you know, it's you know, I like to kind of keep things fresh and change things around every now and again. And it's been really interesting for me learning about software development, learning about, you know, technical solutions that, and how to use technology to solve problems and look at things outside the built environment, you know, and collaborate with software rather than try and necessarily solve it from within. Because we do a lot of good things in the built environment. Sometimes we don't always look above the parapet all that well and look at how other industries are doing things. And I think I've been really keen to try and strip it all back and look at it afresh, and see how we can do it as sort of effectively as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, I do get what you mean about kind of putting your head above the parapet, because there's so much that we can learn from other industries. And I think sometimes the construction industry as a whole can feel quite siloed, where, you know, you're kind of Obviously, you've been in it, and that's all you're ever thinking about is how does this impact the construction industry. But outside of that, there's a lot of people doing a lot of good stuff that you can
Mm.
copy or get advice from as well. Um, I suppose I was quite keen just to hear your take on what are the kind of key things if a engineer was listening to this and just starting a project, what are the kind of the processes or what are the key things that they need to look out for or be mindful of when they are just starting off to make it as sustainable as possible? Is there any kind of key metrics that you would recommend to measure or any particular processes to make sure that are in place from the beginning to ensure that it's not just a bolt on at the end of the project?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if I was sort of giving that advice to someone starting out now, I would say very much a lot of it is about the basics, and I think understanding the materials is the sort of first and foremost thing of any design really, and really this is you know no different to how it's always been, and I think this is one of the things where we can get very kind of carried away with sort of buzzwords and certain things, but structural engineering is about form, it's about efficiency, it's about using materials as to their best ability, and you know you don't have to go back too far to see buildings that were built in incredibly efficient ways with material that is reusable and can be used it's demountable and can be reused again and again and again. A lot of these problems we solved already, and I think as engineers we need to remember and be mindful of the materials that we're using and use them as efficiently as possible. You need to be brave. You need to challenge. Design. We do design things the wrong way around, especially in view of the environment. So I think when looking at designs, engineers need to challenge and look at how a building can be built with as efficiently as possible in terms of material usage, and then start looking at what those materials could be. You know, are they sustainable? Are they regenerative? Can they be reused? Can it be taken apart easily and recycled? They're the sort of all those questions I think need to be asked at the beginning of a project, and at the beginning. I mean, that's the really key bit of advice. You have we have our process and you have design, but having those discussions at the right times is really key. And I would encourage anybody, especially starting out, to ask those questions at the beginning, and don't be afraid, and have some confidence, because just bringing it up and talking about it can have an impact. And we talk about sort of there's obviously some really big problems we've got to solve, but every bit of impact helps, and so I think being brave is really important.
Yeah, I agree with you completely there. Whenever you're sat in a DTM or whenever you've got a conversation at those earlier stages, then sometimes people are just waiting for other people to mention it first before
Yeah,
they'll have the confidence to speak out. And then all of a sudden, because you haven't mentioned anything, you're all actually thinking the same things without actually
absolutely.
communicating.
Yeah. Be the one that puts their hand up and says,
Yeah,
"Well, what is the environmental criteria for the project? Why isn't there one? Why aren't we talking about it? I think why are we putting 12-meter span steel beams in this building and loads of glazing when actually we could use timber and keep the spans to 3 meters or whatever. It might not be what people want to see, but have the conversation. Be brave enough. Just
yeah,
just bring it up. Have the conversation. See what impact that has. And I think there's no that will never be the wrong thing to do.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I think it's just about having the confidence to bring it up in a way that is brings a team together and makes them start thinking about it.
Yeah, because I think it's the whole communication piece. The
Mm,
communication leads to looking at the problems leads to thinking and coming up with the solutions.
yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just have that initial conversation. I suppose I just wanted to kind of talk about first of all, the event that you had a couple of weeks ago, which was women engineering themed, to kind of talk about what was the kind of the main topics of conversation there, and also to kind of get your take on the wider office culture and how things can improve in the wider office culture as well. Because I speak to a lot of engineers that perhaps workplace culture is has kind of gone down a route that they didn't expect, or they joined the industry because they thought the workplace culture would be a particular thing, and it's not actually been that way, particularly referencing graduates here. But I suppose from your perspective, could you give us a little bit of an idea of what the event was about and the outcomes, and also kind of your take on workplace culture too?
Yeah, sure, Dom. Yeah, I mean, so we hosted or co-hosted an event, all the subject matter being women in engineering, and the purpose of it really was to delve into the a lot of the issues in the industry, really about um, women in the industry generally, retention of women in the industry, what it's like, why is it different for a woman in the industry than it is for a man, and what are the barriers to it, and so the kind of that was the sort of the reason for doing it in the first place, was to have a discussion around all of those things. It was very much the idea of it was very much to delve into the kind of root cause of a lot of the problems and try and have those discussions, and not have those kind of very much the opposite of sort of the the kind of box ticking of, well, we employ two women, or we employ three, or whatever. It was very much like, well, let's not go down the route of celebrating the kind of fact that some companies employ certain percentages of women and compared to men or whatever, but actually delve into the issues and talk about that. So that was the purpose of the event. But the reason why I wanted to be part of it, because it was a panel of hosted by Penny Gowler, who's well known in the industry, and the three of the panelists were female, and I was the only male on the panel. But I really wanted to make the point and have be part of the discussion that unless men start changing the way we do things and start taking on some of the decisions that women make, that they have to because of the barriers they face in the industry, then it won't change. So it was very much for me. It was very much a case of listening to those barriers and talking about what I would do or what I have done in the face of those, to try and not necessarily even things out, but bring some sort of parity to it and equity to it. And it was great. We had a great discussion around loads of really interesting topics, and certainly around normalizing things like career breaks and stuff. So and looking at a lot of the barriers to women in engineering, was around at certain stages of careers having to take career breaks for whatever reason, whether it's childcare, whether it's general care, whatever it is, and normalizing those as a normal career, as part of a normal career. So it's never it's never the wrong time, or
Right, yeah.
it's never like these sort of traditional career paths. If you do this for a certain time, do this, you get promoted, then you go here, then you go here. Well, at some point there's going to be a break. So let's just normalize that and make that accepted now, and not make it a problem when it happens sort of 5-6 years into the future or whenever it is.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with that, and I think it's what you said is getting to the root cause of the problem is the most important thing. It is a massive problem in the industry, but like, let's get to the cause of the problem. And I absolutely think it is a mindset shift from a male perspective as well, to be able to kind of accommodate for changes within one's internal self, as that's the starting point, as well as from a company-wide perspective. But I think it is on the individuals and as well, to be able to kind of make that change internally first. I suppose bringing it to the wider company perspective, then I think for you, I just wanted to ask the question is, what do you think is some of the typical problems when it comes to workplace culture, and how do we go about kind of changing the industry or changing the workplace for the better?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a few things. I mean, I still think sort of leadership pathways and working practices are really rigid. I think they're very traditional. I think most people will probably, if people are being really honest, when they look up at the sort of board level or director level at most companies, it's mostly male. I think we need to have different leadership pathways. We need to have clear visibility of how anybody in the industry, no matter who they are or whatever, can get to positions without those barriers in place. But I think it takes leaders, it takes employers, it takes directors, business owners to make some decisions to change those and bring in internal policies that normalize a lot of that. Try and like really encourage parity, especially around kind of career breaks. Like I said before, if we're just using maternity leave as an example, looking at how to equalize that as much as possible. A lot, we were talking about this with someone else the other day, a lot of those default decisions that tend to get made so that it always tends to be certain people that will end up having the break and the time off,
Yeah.
and looking at why is that then, and are we just being lazy, and is there not enough support, or what those things are, and building that in, and then acting on it so that as an employer, um, I want to make sure that people in our company can see me doing it, and my business partner doing it at the same time, so they know it's okay, and they know that they can do it too, and the support's there. So I think by making those decisions, and creating those sort of internal policies and those shifts, that hopefully slowly we can start bringing some cultural change into the industry that will make that easier. I mean, there's a huge issue around women leaving the industry. I mean, there's a huge issue about people leaving the industry generally, but I think we saw, since COVID, there's a huge amount of people leaving the industry, a huge amount of women leaving the industry, and there's a lot of different reasons behind that. But I think the industry needs to work out why, there's, I think COVID showed us that there's a whole world out there of different things, different options, different stuff people could be doing, and maybe their current job isn't as great as they thought it was, and maybe that it's not as flexible, or they can't, so we need to look at that and think, well, what can we do then to we are in a different place now, time things are different, and we need to adjust to that.
Yeah, that's really reminded me. I think because I had someone on the podcast, Lauren Williams, who was a STEM advocate, so went round to not just secondary schools but also primary schools as well,
Yeah,
promoting engineering. But it's that kind of thing, because I remember speaking to a lot of people at graduate level and asking them about why they got into the industry, and they were like, to be fair, all I thought construction was you'd either be a bricklayer or a roofer, and that was the only options. I
yeah,
didn't actually know
yeah,
there was so many different avenues I could go down. So I do think it's up to the individual to be promoting the industry, up to the individual to think about the wider marketing and their reach as well, to
mm,
be able to say about the different career paths on offer, and also the impacts that can have. Leading back to the sustainability piece, this isn't just a job where it's building things. It is much more of a wider impact than that. So yeah, I kind of completely agree with you there. It's more of a marketing piece, and up to individuals as well to promote the industry.
yeah. And I think it's a really good point, because I think that having those STEM ambassadors, and um, going into the educational system, and talking and communicating about the industry is hugely important, because by the time people get to a certain stage in their educational system, it might already be too late, because they may already have made decisions that will take them away from the industry
Yeah,
already. And that's that. With a lot of subjects around maths, science, the STEM subjects, it's really sad, because they are incredibly interesting subjects, and they're the building blocks of the planet, and how we do things, and how we put stuff together and make things, and incredibly interesting and creative industries and professions. But a lot of people don't even know about them, as you say, it's crazy. But it is true, and it is so important. But when they get there, if that works, then when they get into the industry, we've got to make sure the industry works for them.
yeah, definitely. Well, James, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. It's been a really interesting conversation. So I'll include the link to the company website for Veridi Path and Jensen Hunt below. So please do check out their company pages. But James, thank you so much for being a guest.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.